cult deprogrammer?
Yeah, so what he was doing, people were hiring him to get their kids out of Scientology and more Bible-based cults. Yeah, and so I thought that was fascinating, and so I interviewed him and did. It was my first cover story for that publication. In fact, it got me my permanent job with the Phoenix New Times back in 1995. And Scientology was part of it. I was fascinated. It was really interesting to see how much it was trying to harass him and destroy him. I got to see that close up. So that just made me interested in other stories about Scientology. So over the years, although I covered a lot of other things, I would come back to Scientology stories every once in a while. And the company moved me around. And by 2007, they had given me the job of editor-in-chief of the Village Voice here in New York.
Wow.
So, so I was not doing Scientology then for a little while. I had my hands full. What we were trying to do at that time was take a legendary paper that had a good website and get everyone to think, no, we're a digital news enterprise that happens to put out a weekly paper. You know, it's a different mentality. And so what I do as a manager is I try to set an example. I wanted to find something that I could put on the website every day. And at first what I was doing was going through Village Voice archives. At that point in 2007, 2008, most of the original Village Voice stories going back to the 50s and the 60s were not online. And so I was just digging through them. I was having so much fun. I found the first time they ever mentioned this young musician named Bobby Dylan. The first time they ever wrote a story about this young comic named Walter, a.k.a. Woody Allen.
Oh, wow.
So I thought they were great, right? And I'm putting them online for the first time. But the problem was people weren't reading it. They didn't care, right? So, and then every once in a while, I'd put a story about Scientology on there because I still had my old sources and everything, and it just went crazy, right? So I could see the writing on the wall. I said, look, if I'm going to put something on the website of the Village Voice every day, it's going to be about Scientology. And in April 2011, I started doing that every day, putting something about Scientology. And I was fortunate that I had sources all over the world that would send me stuff. And I've been doing it ever since then, Julian. I've been writing about Scientology. I'm the only journalist in the world that covers Scientology as a daily beat. And that's what I've been doing since 2011. I left the Village Voice in 2012 and wrote a book and started my own website. And so now I'm on Substack, tonyortega.substack.com.
Link in description.
And that's where every day, 7 a.m. Eastern, I've got something new about Scientology. Great audience, great community of people who comment. And over the years, I've gotten to break some big stories.
Every day at 7 a.m., you don't run out of things to write about with Scientology.
Well, look, some days are more important than others. It's true. Some days there's a big breaking story. Other days it's, we're having some fun with archives or, interviewing people. But it's been, it kind of comes in waves when it's really big stories. But for example, 2017, I got to break the story that Danny Masterson was being investigated by the LAPD.
Yeah, I really want to litigate this case today and go through this because I was watching this in the background for a while. It got retried and stuff, and
I was in court for both trials every day. I was just 15 feet away from Bijou and the rest of the family.
Yeah,
and got to see him led away in handcuffs when he was convicted after the second trial. So
how did you break the story? What happened there?
I found out that multiple women had complained about him, but what really made it a fascinating story was that the LAPD was having problems with the investigation. So if you look at the very first story I wrote in March 2017, it's all there. I've got copies of the police reports. I've got excerpts from a letter one of the Jane Does had written the chief of police complaining.
What year?
This was March 2017.
Yeah, but what year had she written approximately?
Oh, the letter was only maybe a couple weeks old when that I excerpted.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So right then.
I mean, it was a crisis moment. They had come to these incidents happened way back in 2002 and 2003. Right. But they had reopened this whole thing, and when the women went to them in 2016, and by early 2017, I was hearing about this and that they were really panicked because the LAPD was doing some very strange things with this investigation, things that came out later in a trial, some really strange missteps that the LAPD was doing. And these women thought, Scientology's messing this all up, or the LAPD is. And
cut them in the pocket.
And
maybe.
So that's what my initial story was, is that, is the LAPD, messing up this investigation. So that was a big story because then the LAPD did admit that they were looking into Danny Masterson. All the press covered it. But then I covered it, that story virtually every day from 2017 until he was convicted last May. So it's been a big part of my life. And what I always tell people is the real story is what these women have been through. They have been through so much harassment and so much, again, the LAPD was messing it up at some points. I know it looked like the prosecutors were kind of holding back.
Prosecutors were
it took so long. That story came out in March 2017. The prosecutors did not charge Danny Masterson until June 2020. So for 3 years, these women were waiting for some kind of a case to emerge.
Do you think some of that had to do with, I'm just playing a little devil's advocate here, had to do with the fact that the cases were like 14, 15 years old when they were first reported?
It's always going to be a tough case when time has passed, when you got a celebrity involved. All these things made it a difficult case.
That's right.
But you put the Scientology element in it, and that's what really makes it difficult. And
why for this?
Well, these prosecutors knew that it was going to be, what they wanted to convince the jury of was that the reason these women had not come forward earlier was they were worried about retaliation from Scientology. So you have to explain to the jury why that is, the fact that Danny's a protected celebrity. And that's why I was there, Julian, honestly, is that I wanted to see how much Scientology was a part of this case. And it was a very big part of it.
Like, as in obvious to the idea even that you see dudes sitting in the courtroom who are maybe hired thugs of Scientology?
Not just people in the gallery. The attorneys on Danny's side were doing bizarre things that only made sense if they were taking directions directly from David Miscavige, the leader of Scientology. Okay, so before there was a trial, there was something called a preliminary hearing. In a preliminary hearing, you have just the victims testify. You don't have all the witnesses testify, but you just have the women. This is the first time they testified on the witness stand.
And they're Jane Does, right?
The 3 Jane Does.
Yeah.
And this first time they got to testify was in this preliminary hearing. At that point, Danny Masterson's attorney was Tom Mesereau. If you remember Tom Mesereau, who defended
Can you pull him up, Alessi?
Michael Jackson and
big time guy.
And he's the one with the famous hairdo.
Great hair.
Yes.
He does have great hair.
And I was sitting just right behind him in the courtroom. This was like kind of during the pandemic, so that like there weren't very many seats. You had to sit far apart. I was sitting right behind him. And they had questioned, I can't remember, Jane Doe 3 was on the stand. And the attorney for Scientology leaned over you know how there's a little barrier there between the gallery seats and where the attorneys sit in the right. She leans over it and she's saying to him, "It's not in there. It's not in there." And see, I'm not trying to hear them, but I can't help it. They're like 3 feet from me. What she's pointing at is this Scientology book. So then Mesereau gets up and he goes up to Jane Doe and he says, you keep saying that you weren't allowed to report Danny Masterson and that's why it took you so long. And you keep saying that it's in Scientology's rules that you can't go to the police. I have the ethics book here. I'm going to ask you to look through a chapter and you tell me if you can find anything in there about not going to the police.
Was this like something written by like L. Ron Hubbard?
Yes.
Oh my God.
This is in the preliminary hearing. Okay, so we take a break. We come back, and he says, "Okay, so did you look through the book?" "Yes, I did." "Did you find anything in that chapter about not, that you can't go to the police?" And she says, "No, I couldn't." "Thank you, Your Honor." Right, like the big Perry Mason moment.
He's strutting off.
And it's very clear to me that he did that because David Miscavige had told the attorney to tell him to do that. Okay, so then the prosecutor comes up. It's his turn. He says, "Mr. Mesereau, can I borrow that book, please?" And so he takes the book and he shows her a different chapter, and it's right there in black and white. Scientologists cannot report to civil authorities. Isn't that what that says there? Yes, it is.
They think they wouldn't find that?
Right. And so this is the best moment. He walks over. Again, I'm sitting right there. He's like 3 feet from me. The prosecutor walks over, hands the book to Mesereau and says, "Thank you. That was very helpful."
That's incredible.
And that was the moment I wrote about this. This was 2021. I was like, I just witnessed David Miscavige and Scientology completely screw up Danny Masterson's defense live in front of me. That's how involved Scientology was in this. There was a huge blunder, and it kept costing them, because anytime after that, when Mesereau or his successor, this guy Philip Cohen, would argue to the judge to keep stuff out, Scientology out, she would always remind them, you guys brought Scientology into this case to begin with. That blunder cost them over and over and over again.
And that was the one you're mentioning is from 2021. So that's the first trial, right?
That was the preliminary hearing.
Oh, that's right.
So that was the 3 women testified, and the judge then decided there is enough evidence to have a trial. That's the point of the preliminary hearing.
Now,
these women ended up testifying 3 separate times: in the preliminary hearing, the trial that had a hung jury, and then the trial that convicted him.
So that's amazing that they did this and
they
put
went through
themselves through
so
that
much
ordeal.
torture. That's what I want people to understand, how much an ordeal these women went through over so many years.
I'm always careful about this because I don't have the articles in front of me. I don't want to mess anything up, because obviously you saw them and were part of this case, but without revealing who they might have been or something like that, was there a similar story with all of them as far as their background and how they came into contact with Danny and how he behaved around them to get to that point where he committed this act?
All 3 of them were Scientologists at the time of the attacks.
Oh boy.
Jane Doe 3 had been his girlfriend, and they'd been living together. Jane Doe 1 was just part of their social group, and you saw him at parties. And Jane Doe 2 was a Scientologist actress that had gotten to know Danny, and he asked her over to his house one time. But also 2 other women testified. The actress Trisha Vesey, a well-known actress of independent film, she testified that she was attacked by Masterson way back in '96.
Oh, so she testified on the record?
She testified in the first trial. And a woman named Kathleen Jenkins testified in the second trial that she was attacked in Toronto at a party when he was there. There's also another woman who is part of the civil suit, Babette Realis, who alleges that she was attacked by Danny, but she was not part of the criminal trial. So that's 6. But there have been references to other victims in the court papers.
Right. So the 3 Jane Does are the ones that were the actual charges. But
they
these
were the
other people provided corroborating.
Exactly.
Got it. Whoa.
And then in the first trial, the jury hung on all 3. In the second trial, he got 2 convictions and 1 hung jury. And a really important element of this, I know it gets confusing, but you could not in California and most other places bring a charge of forcible rape against a person 20 years after the incident. But in California, there's this law where you can bring multiple charges.
Oh, wow.
It's called the one strike law. And under that, if he gets 2 or more convictions, they carry potential life sentences. And that's why the prosecutor was very clear about this in the preliminary hearings and stuff. He was saying when there's a potential life sentence involved, there's no statute of limitations. Scientology, well, I shouldn't say Scientology. His defense attorneys fought this over and over and over again, but they kept losing because, under that law. So we knew going in, when we finally found out that they had a verdict, I remember we were standing in the hallway. I was like 3 feet from Danny, and they all seemed buoyant. They thought it was going to be a hung jury. I thought it was going to be a hung jury too.
In 2023.
The May 2023, the second trial. We heard there was a verdict, and we were all standing in the hallway after a lunch break. It was just really crowded. I'm right there by Danny, by Bijou, by Danny's mom, his brothers, right there.
Did you ever talk with them?
The brothers a little bit, but I didn't. I was conscious of not wanting to get kicked out of there. I knew if I said anything to them, they would probably ask the judge to kick me out because they really didn't like me. So I would get some funny looks from Bijou, but I never really.
They didn't like you?
I didn't really spoke to him.
No way.
Yeah. So we went in there, and I think most of us knew that if he gets 2 convictions, he's going to prison. 1 conviction is not enough because under the law they were. You see, under the law
they were after the fact too.
It's the law. Under the law they were charging him with It was the word multiple. Now, 3 would mean even more time, but you need 2. And so the clerk read out the first guilty and then read out, as soon as the clerk read out the second guilty, we heard this otherworldly wail. I can't do it. It's just like this horrendous sound, because Bijou knew when it was 2, he's going to prison. And right after the second one was announced, she just wailed. And the judge said, listen, you're going to have to compose yourself or you're going to have to leave. And she was crying. She was being more quiet at that point. But see, she knew, we all knew, you needed 2, and they had the 2. So in the second trial, he was convicted on 2, hung on the third. It was close on the third.
Was that the girlfriend?
Yeah. I mean, it's always tougher with that one.
Tough.
And yeah, exactly. And look, she did great on the stand, both trials. So you really can't blame her. It's just, and we don't know what the jury.
Yeah, I don't blame. It's a tough thing to convince a jury of 12. I was living with a guy, and right. That's difficult. But why do you think they were in the 2021 trial? Why 2022, the one before it? Why do you think they came back hung on all 3?
I think that the prosecution could have done a better job. Philip Cohen, the defense attorney, did a really good job in that first trial, confusing things and raising some issues. And so the second time around, they were ready for it a little bit better. And I think one big decision they made that paid off huge was that the prosecutors were 2 deputy district attorneys named Reinhold Mueller and Ariel Anson. And Mueller handled virtually everything in the first trial. When they came back for the second trial, Ariel Anson was much more involved in the opening statements, in the interviews of the witnesses, but then the closing arguments. She was incredible. She was just absolutely amazing.
What'd she say?
The first thing she said was, "It all started with a drink." And as soon as she said that, like she was telling us a story, she had everybody in the room in the palm of her hand.
Guys, if you're still watching this video and you haven't yet hit that subscribe button, please take 2 seconds and go hit it right now. Thank you.
And what both she and Reinhold Mueller did so much better in the closing of that second trial was they told a better story. And they said, look, think about it. In all 3, he was accused that these women had something to drink. They felt unusually intoxicated. And then he was taking advantage of them, and it was very violent. And the point they were making the second time was he had to think this out ahead of time. He had to get them the drink. He had to make sure they were in a certain place where it could happen. There was planning involved.
What was the story? And it may get a little graphic, so trigger warning to people listening to this. But it sounds like he would do some form of slight. I say slight because maybe it wasn't GHB, but some form of getting them tipsy, so date rape kind of thing.
Well, both Jane Doe 1 and 2 testified that they had 1 drink and were just so intoxicated afterwards, so unusually intoxicated. And the prosecutors, they just flat out said it, that he drugged them. He drugged them and then raped them. And so Jane Doe 1, it involved a jacuzzi and then taking her up to a bathroom and putting her in a shower. And then Jane Doe 2, it involved inviting her over and giving her a big glass of wine. And that also involved a jacuzzi. And it was, they just both testified at how violent it was. And they were sort of in and out of consciousness and saying, no, stop. And he was just not, it was just very violent. It was graphic, and and I can tell you, I heard their testimony 3 separate times, preliminary hearing and 2 trials. These women were absolutely consistent. I would say that they learned from being cross-examined by Tom Mesereau and then Philip Cohen twice how to, answer them, a little better and anticipate what was going to be asked of him a little better. But the story wasn't changing. They were absolutely consistent. They did a great job.
And you're sitting in there because Danny was on bail, so he comes in there on his own recognizance and everything. It's got to be so strange, especially after maybe you've heard all this twice and you're at the 3rd trial, he's still on bail, walking in there every day with a coffee with his wife. It's like, this dude, unless we are really missing something here, is a serial rapist, and he's walking in the same door I am.
You know, it was funny because it was up on the 9th floor, which is the most secure floor in that building at the criminal courts building in L.A. And you have to go through security to get in the building, and then you have to go through a separate security just to get on that floor. And most days, not every day, but most days, the first 3 people on that floor were me and Danny and Bijou. And I would sit on one side of the hallway, and they would sit on the other side of the hallway. And, it was just, he would always be there with a big, giant Starbucks iced coffee, and then Mom would show up, and then his attorneys would show up. And it was a little surreal, I will tell you that.
Yeah, and they know you're the guy who, broke this and kind of started the whole thing, which is very cool, by the way, that you were able to do that. But, for people out there, obviously we've been talking about Danny Masterson now for the last 10, 15 minutes, and a lot of people know he's this really well-recognized actor. He was in that 70s show. That was kind of the original thing to put him all the way on the map. But what do we know his backstory of when he joined Scientology, or any of the thought process as to why and what types of roles he had in the organization?
Well, he was brought up in it. His mom and his dad and then his stepdad were all in it.
Are they still in it?
Oh, yeah. Well, his mother still is, definitely.
Whoa.
His stepdad is not. Joe Reish is a great guy. And he's been one of my best sources about, Danny's early life and what they've been through. But yeah, he was very much brought up in it, and his mom was his manager, and he was doing commercials when he was very, very young. They were kind of there was a particular larger clan of the Mastersons, the Rabisis, Jason Lee,
like Giovanni Ribisi.
Yeah. Giovanni grew up in it, and his sister grew up in it.
Another amazing actor.
Really? And they were all kind of part of this young Hollywood thing. And I remember when Going Clear came out, I was fortunate enough to be part of that HBO film that Alex Gibney made, Lawrence Wright.
Great documentary. By the way.
We went to Sundance for for the opening of that in Utah. And I remember Danny had gone to that Sundance to give an interview trashing, what we were doing. Danny was one of the celebrities that was willing to give interviews and badmouth the critics of Scientology. Very few would do that, but he grew up in it. He was kind of a fiery defender of Scientology.
He really believed in it.
Well, based on what came out in court, he knew he'd been protected by Scientology for a long time and gotten away with a lot of things.
That's the thing. I think, we're going to talk today about different ways people get brainwashed over time. You've obviously covered this for a long time from the outside to try to evaluate it from a psychological standpoint. But when it comes to the really powerful ones that they put on a pedestal in there, someone like a Danny Masterson, best example obviously being a Tom Cruise, it does feel to me, looking at it, that the air of invincibility that they feel, meaning the actors, the famous people, with the organization operating on their behalf, seems to completely blind them to the methods with which that invincibility is born.
Right. People ask me, what's the appeal? Why do, and also I want to always point out, they have a few celebrities. It drives me crazy whenever I see a reporter say, Hollywood's got so many Scientology celebrities. No, they don't have so many. It's a few, right?
And they've got good ones though.
And they've lost some. They've lost some, right? Some older, but what's the appeal? I mean, what is Scientology? Scientology is this thing that this science fiction writer named L. Ron Hubbard came up with in the 50s. And he had this idea that there's this whole galactic drama going on that you're a part of that you've forgotten you were ever part of.
Right.
And if you can just remember who you were 100,000, million, billion, trillion years ago, you will remember how you have taken part in this galactic-wide narrative for years and years.
Now pay $35 to take this test. Thank you.
Now pay $800 or $900 an hour to go through that counseling, and it takes years. I mean, it takes $1 million, $2 million to get up to that level where the top celebrities are. But that's the idea, is that and it's very attractive to some people who are unhappy with their life or they're frustrated with things, to be told, no, this person you are now is just a manifestation of this much more important thing, Thetan it's called. You're actually trillions of years old. You've been through incredible adventures. You just don't remember them. We're going to help you remember them.
I mean, I laugh, but like they get some people. They get some people who, objectively speaking, sometimes have a pretty good brain on them too.
But what I'm getting to is that, okay, so like I talked to a guy once who went through that, and he was saying, well, listen, Tony, so I remember one session, I remember that I was literally running a planet. I was running a prison planet somewhere, and I was killing people by the tens of thousands. And then the session was over, and I'm back to being Joe Blow, me, nobody. And he says, I was walking on air. I was like, I'm really somebody hugely important in the galaxy, just that nobody around me knows it. That's where that arrogance comes from.
What do you mean he was running a prison, like he was like hallucinating?
This is what auditing is. They want you to remember these things that happened to you before.
So he thought he was remembering that he had run this prison planet.
Yeah.
And he thought that was a good thing.
And they convinced themselves that, well, look, you're a big, important person, right?
I mean, Adolf Hitler was a big, important person, but I wouldn't be bragging about that. You know what I mean? Like that sounds like something he would do.
I know. It's crazy. But no, they convinced themselves that what they're remembering. I'm sorry.
You're good.
I called you by a different name. You need to go back and please change.
You did?
Yeah.
I missed it, so we're good. Don't worry about it. Don't worry. I get Dorey in all the time. I get Jason sometimes. I get Jordan. Like I get something across the board, so it's all good.
Sorry.
You're fine.
Anyway, no. What I'm trying to explain is, I think maybe this is where that arrogance comes from that you're talking about. Is that they are pumped up with the idea that they're incredibly important people, and that other people don't get it, but that they really start to look down at the rest of us that don't understand what's really going on.
Yes.
And there's a superiority about Scientologists.
Well, Miscavige still looks up, but just saying.
Yeah, you want to get into that? I can get into that.
What do you mean?
Well, people often point out that he's not a tall man. And I decided to find out, this is my job. I'm a reporter. How tall is David Miscavige?
Oh, no.
So I found his former personal tailor, a man in Italy who had literally made his clothes for like 15 years.
How did you find that guy?
I actually visited him in Italy.
Oh, my God.
Yeah, on a vacation. And I asked him, I said, listen, if there's anybody in the world who knows how actually tall David Miscavige is, it's you. How tall is he? And he told me 155 max. Now that's metric.
Centimeters?
It's centimeters. I had to convert it. It's 5'1".
Oh. Is that with heels on too?
1.
Is that with like nice leather shoes on?
I know if you Google it, Google says he's 5'3". I don't know where Google gets their data. I got it from the man himself. Okay, the man who made the guy's clothes.
He is a 155. Even in Italy, that's short. My God. Whoa. So, I mean, I joke about that, but that does seem
but
to
it's,
be
I mean,
like
it's, the reason why it's important is simply that this guy wields ultimate total control over Scientology. He has since 1986, 87. Hey, you got to give the guy credit that he's able to run something like that, and he's not a tall man, whatever. But David Miscavige has now run the Scientology movement longer than L. Ron Hubbard did.
That's wild.
Who founded it?
That's wild. But he's also, he holds on to power through paranoia and domination. And,
Yep.
you know, they're a mafia-like clan, but your friend Mark Bunker was in here and did an amazing job laying out some of the things they do.
There was a really tragic death at the Fort Harrison Hotel back in 1995. Lisa McPherson was a woman who was a devout Scientologist for many, many years. She was having a mental breakdown, and she got involved in a little fender-bender accident right outside the Fort Harrison Hotel. And when the paramedics arrived on the scene, she had taken off all of her clothes and was walking down the street naked. And this female paramedic comes up and says, "Why are you doing this?" And she said, "I need somebody to pay attention to me. I need help."
Right.
With the backing of, you know, being their own kind of mafia, but some of the business maneuvers, even if they kind of cheat to do it, it's pretty smart. I mean, he buys up real estate. He obviously has he has built a very big balance sheet for a fake religion that doesn't have, you know, more than maybe 40, 50,000 people in it. You know, there's something about that. I don't want to like give him a compliment, but it's like impressive, I guess, that he's been able to, as you said, hold on to it this long and grow it as he has when the ideology behind it is so blatantly, absurdly hilarious.
I mean, that's why they can never talk about it. I mean, you know, I would have more respect for them if they did. I mean, if they really opened up and said, "Whoa, Scientology, we're helping you recover million-year-old memories of how you're part of the galaxy's history." If they said that, I'd have more respect for them. But of course, they can't, because then nobody would join.
Right.
So they have to sell it as what we call a mystery sandwich. That, you know, it's like if you watch their Super Bowl ads, it's like, you know, reach your potential. Well, that sounds good. You know, I'd like to reach my potential.
I like potential.
Right. You know. So they make it seem like it's more of like a self-help organization.
Yes.
And they don't tell you that you're going to be spending years, spending hundreds of dollars an hour removing invisible alien entities from your body. Because see, you're a Thetan and you're 76 trillion years old. However, along the way, other Thetans have attached themselves to you. You just can't see them.
Thetans.
Yeah, they're called body Thetans. And so from, you know, you go through this progression called the Bridge to Total Freedom, and you go through the grades and you go clear, and then you go into the OT levels. They're called operating Thetan levels. Once you get past OT3, from OT3 to OT7, this will take you years and years. Through those levels, you're simply trying to find, locate, and remove body Thetans, these invisible beings.
They're just making it up as they go.
Well,
Obviously.
they don't think they're making it up. They're trying to locate them with that e-meter, and they think they found them, and then they tell them to go away. I mean,
be gone,
Julian.
They just left.
I know you think this is funny, but this is what they spend so much money on.
Show me on the bear where the Thetan touched you.
Exactly.
So, who's the highest level OT level you've ever spoken with who left?
Well, I've spoken to OT8s. Yeah, absolutely. OT8's the highest, and I've spoken to several, and they help me plot out what all those levels are, and we've published them. I've published the OT8 level.
What do they have to say about being in that long and putting that much into it and then realizing it's all a lie?
You know, they're hurt. You know, it can be embarrassing to come
Sure.
forward and say that they have wasted so much money. Maybe their family's been ripped apart.
Yeah.
And it can be very difficult. That's why I think there's, you know, a small independent movement of former Scientologists, former church members who still hold on to, quote, the technology and still want to believe that stuff is true. But most people move out of it entirely and realize, oh, no, the whole thing was just, you know, a figment of L. Ron Hubbard's imagination. But yeah, I've spoken to people who were OT8, and it's hard for them to talk about
Sure.
what they went through, because the cruel OT3 to OT7 are different ways of removing body Thetans. So I love OT4. I just think it's so great. You're literally dealing with the drug problems of your body Thetans.
They're drug addicts too.
But they've been using like space coke from 20 million years ago that's better than anything you can get on Earth.
How do we get that?
Exactly.
Let's get it right here.
I mean, it's crazy. It's crazy stuff. And so OT3, 4, 5, 6, OT7, finally OT7, which can take years and years and years. You finally remove the last of your body Thetans. Now, and you can only do those top couple, like OT6 and 7, at the Flag Land Base in Clearwater, Florida. That's why they make so much money there. Is all these Scientologists from around the world go there. That's the only place they can get that. Then when you're finally ready for OT8, the only place you can get OT8 is on the cruise ship in the Caribbean, the Freelands.
Oh, yeah.
That is the only place you can do OT8. And what's so cruel about OT8 is that, you've been spending all this time, all these years, removing body Thetans and trying to understand who you were millions and billions of years ago. And on OT8, they tell you, okay, all those memories you thought you recovered, they were the memories of the body Thetans. All those memories are who you are not. And now that you know who you are not, now you can begin from the beginning and learn who you are. It's the biggest, prank L. Ron Hubbard ever played. And you can only get there after 1 million or 2 million. So this is why people don't like to talk about it, is because they've been pranked so badly.
It's you're right. Just from a pride standpoint, it's so hard to admit that. But I can't even imagine, because you're pointing out, it's so many years and years in between OT levels. If you're talking to an OT8, you're talking to someone who's been in there for at least 2 decades.
Yeah, I mean, I've talked to somebody that it took them 20 years to do OT7. OT7
just to do OT.
OT7 is legendary as the toughest.
What do they have to do specifically?
It's so bad, Julian. It's so bad.
Tell me how bad it is,
solo
Tony.
auditing. You're at home auditing yourself, trying to find your body Thetans on your own.
Are you using a laser pointer? How's this going down?
No, the e-meter. You're using the e-meter with yourself.
They send you one at home.
You have it at home. You're using it on yourself. You're trying to find these body Thetans and get rid of them.
Is this like Ben Stiller in Dodgeball, where he has the electrical sockets on his nipples?
Well, let me tell you.
Come on, e-meter, let's go.
Listen, let me tell you that John Brousseau told me. John Brousseau was David Miscavige's brother-in-law and worked very close with Tom Cruise. John Brousseau said the closest anybody has ever come to doing an impression of David Miscavige is accurate. It was the Ben Stiller character in Dodgeball.
That is not a compliment in any way, shape, or
You made me bleed my own blood.
I didn't know that.
If you want to know what David Miscavige is like, watch Dodgeball and watch Ben Stiller's character.
Oh my God. If anyone ever said that about me, I'd off myself. There's no coming back from that.
That's coming from his former brother-in-law.
Yeah. Now, he also had a big falling out with his father, who I think just passed away a couple years ago.
Right.
It was Ron Miscavige,
right? So Ron Miscavige Sr. had 4 children. Ron Miscavige Jr., twins, David and Denise Miscavige, and then another daughter, Lori.
Okay.
So David Miscavige is the leader of Scientology, and Ron became a Sea Org member on the base. He was a trumpet player and ran the band.
Did he originally get his son into it?
Yes. So in 1979, I think. Let's see. Dave was 16. Is 76. So even earlier than that. Anyway, when Dave was in school, he had asthma problems, and Ron thought maybe Dianetics could help. And that's why he got them into it initially. And they ended up going to England, and they were learning to become auditors. And Dave was like the phenom, right? He was like the 14-year-old hot shit auditor that was going to be like the next big thing. He eventually ended up in 1978 in the California desert, where Ron Hubbard was making movies, and David had become what's called a messenger, which is one of these young aides to Hubbard. And there's photos where Ron is directing a scene and little David Miscavige is running a camera. He became like the second or third cameraman under Ron. And that proximity to him is how he curried favor, and was eventually in the 80s, when Ron was in hiding and nobody knew where he was, Ron Miscavige. Ron Hubbard had an aide named Pat Broker with him.
When he was in hiding.
David Miscavige was at the base with everybody. Broker and David Miscavige would meet to pass messages between each other in order to keep Hubbard still running Scientology. So because Pat Broker and David Miscavige were the bottleneck and nobody knew where Hubbard was, that's why they amassed power. Is everyone had to go through those two guys. So when Ron Hubbard died, the big question then was, which of those two guys is going to take over, Pat Broker or David Miscavige? And, supposedly Hubbard favored Pat Broker, but Dave muscled him out of the way. And,
how did he do that? I mean, he's not very big.
I mean, people have talked about how people had talked about how, once you can get the power in there and you can make people get punishments, he just one after another deposed people that, were in a position of power until he was the last one. So now he's in charge of he's got the attorneys on his side. He's got all the materials.
What became of that other guy? What was his
That
name
was a
again?
great question. Pat Broker. So Pat and Annie Broker were actually with L. Ron Hubbard in his last years in hiding.
Sorry to hear that.
And as Ron was deteriorating and kind of going, losing his mind.
Could you imagine that guy losing his mind? Like he just spent a lifetime losing his mind, losing it as he's dying. Oh my God.
Yeah, I think it was rough. And I just don't think Pat Broker had the kind of ruthless mentality you would need to take over at that point. And Dave pushed him out of the way. But then Dave was very concerned about him. So he hired 2 former cops to follow Pat Broker for the next 22 years. He paid them about $500,000 a year. And wherever Pat Broker went, these 2 guys went. And I interviewed them because they eventually were kicked out and sued Scientology. And they talked to us reporters for like a day. I got to talk to them for half a day, and then the Tampa Bay Times guys got to talk to them for half a day. And they were saying that, yes, we're all used to the idea that Scientology will do what's called a noisy investigation on people. They want you to know you're being followed. They want to freak you out. They want your family members to know that they're being watched. They were on a different kind of thing. Their mandate was, you're going to follow Pat Broker 24 hours a day, forever. But he can't know it. So, for example, this was like in the late 80s. They rented the house next to Broker's without him knowing it. But they had one of them had enlisted his dad to befriend Pat Broker, and they would meet in a bar, get to know him, and had the dad give Pat Broker for one Christmas in the late 80s a cordless phone. And back then, the very first cordless phones,
the Gordon Gekko thing.
The signal between the handheld and the base unit was a radio signal. And so they had rented the house next door so they could intercept the signal and they could listen into all of Pat Broker's calls.
That's nuts.
For years, Pat Broker was followed by these 2 cops and never knew it. And he eventually went to the Czech Republic for a while. And
they followed him there?
They followed him there, came back to the United States. And, what became clear over time was Pat Broker had no interest in taking over Scientology or having anything to do with Scientology anymore. He was like a college English teacher somewhere, So
he had officially left the church?
He had nothing to do with it anymore. But Miscavige is so paranoid that he would come back and try to make some sort of return that he has him watched it 24 hours a day.
He has the type of paranoia you hear about when you read the history books about the biggest despots, and we can all name them.
He's an absolute ruler. He's an absolute ruler. He runs the entire organization. Nothing happens without his say so. And then so you would ask him about his father. His father, yeah. Ron Miscavige, was on the base with him, and eventually he just couldn't take it anymore. He just was sick and tired of it, and he was married to a younger woman, and they decided to make an escape.
An escape.
Yeah, to escape the base in Southern California. And one of my favorite details, I talked about this, it's just crazy. They didn't just want to leave everything. They wanted some of their possessions. And so they came up with this idea that they were going to mail birthday presents to, I think, her mom. And she's going to be 75. We're going to send her 75 gifts. It's a fun thing to do. And they were actually mailing out their own possessions to her so they would have some things.
What is the base?
Including, I'll get to that, including L. Ron Hubbard books.
Oh, because they wanted to smuggle it out.
So, in other words, Ron Miscavige wanted to escape from the base and get out from under his son's, rulership, but he was still a Scientologist. He still believed in You see what I'm saying?
Okay.
So they were smuggling out L. Ron Hubbard books because they couldn't imagine living without them. They wanted to escape the base. Anyway, it's just so sad.
What is the base like?
Okay, so, you know about the Big Blue former hospital in downtown Los Angeles. That's
right.
called PAC Base, Pacific Area Command. 90 miles east of that, in San Jacinto, California, they had taken over this resort called Gilman Hot Springs in 1979, I think, with the idea that it would be where Hubbard could live in some seclusion. But then he took off and never ended up living there. So that became their international management base. It's got like 400 or 500 acres. It's got all these buildings to it. That's where the Headleys were for many, many years. Mike Rinder spent a lot of time out there. And eventually,
we'll come back to the Headleys.
In 2004, Miscavige was so paranoid about his own people, he created a prison for them called the Hole. The Hole started at the Int base or Gold base in January 2004. There's still some version of it today. I mean, there's still top executives that have been basically disappeared that will never leave that base, that David had for some reason decided that they were a liability. But, Mike Rinder spent a couple of years in the Hole there.
I had asked Mark about this, and it was hard for even him to answer. He's been covering this forever because it's so strange. But how do they have a private prison and that itself is not grounds for the feds to come in and say this is false imprisonment, completely illegal? And what Mark was saying is that, well, people can technically leave if they want to. And I'm like, can they though?
No, the problem is the risk for law enforcement is that there's no question, especially in that period. And the FBI did consider it. There was an investigation. This is what Lawrence writes. One of the things he revealed when he came out with this story about Paul Haggis in the New Yorker in
great director.
2011, he revealed that there was an FBI investigation. In fact, in October 2010, the FBI was getting very close to raiding that base, to the point where Mark Headley told me that they had asked him, they figured Miscavige would run for Burbank, to where Tom Cruise has his planes. And so they literally recorded the tail numbers on Tom Cruise's planes so they would have that. I talked to another ex-Scientologist, Matt Pesh, who told me that they had asked him, will you come in the vans with us when we drive on so that there's somebody with us that knows where everything is? And Matt said, I'm ready to go. That's how close they were to raiding that base in October 2010. They did not do so. The risk here, here's the risk, Julian. The risk is they go on there, they open the door, there's all these people in there that have been prisoners for years. Come on out, you're free. The risk is they say, oh no, we're not prisoners. We're fine where we are. And then you're screwed if you're law enforcement. You are screwed. And so that's why they ultimately have a hard time doing it, is that, as Mike Rinder will tell you, the bars were inside the head. It wasn't the locked door that was keeping them in. So
and it was locked.
Yeah. Oh no. Yeah. Absolutely. They were there. They have no freedom. They had no freedom. The people that were in the Hole. I think they have a little more freedom today. I think that whole base has been de-emphasized because it became so close to being raided. Miscavige moved the studios out to a new studio in L.A. on Sunset Boulevard. He's moved much more stuff to Florida now. That base is much less important today than it used to be. And I think it's because he knew he was vulnerable there to an FBI raid.
What made that guy, you mentioned Matt Pesh, who was the Scientologist who told you about them checking the planes and knowing what was going on. What eventually made him leave Scientology?
Well, Mark Headley was the one who told me about the plane numbers. Matt Pesh was the one who told me that they had asked him if he would go on the van with them if they raided the base. And he said yes. Matt is married to Amy Scobie, and she's also a fascinating figure. They met in Scientology. Amy was at the very top. She wrote a book called At the Top or something. Great story about how she saw what she saw in Scientology. All these people have incredible stories where they were in the Sea organization. They were treated so badly over so many years, and that something finally woke them up. Each one of them has a different story about what it was where they finally like, why am I wasting my life here? And then they have to get out, and getting out is not easy. And every single, from Mike Rinder to Matt Pash to Amy Scobie to Mark Headley to Claire Headley, they all have a fascinating story of what finally woke them up, and then how do you get out? When Scientology, they literally have something they call the blow drill. Mark's great at telling this story, where if somebody left the base, they had this protocol that they would follow to get that person back, and they'd
blow them.
No, that's.
Sorry,
I know. That's the play on words. I know. No, they've blown the base, and now they go into the blow drill to find that person, track them down, bring them back. I talked to one guy. He had escaped 5 separate times. And each time they would find him, they'd come back and they'd intimidate the hell out of him and said, "You can't leave this way. You need to come back and route out properly." It's called
route out.
Route out. And they'd talk him into it. And he'd come back, and then he'd be like, "What am I doing?" Finally, the 5th time, he's like, "No." And he realized there was nothing they could do. It's just, like I said, the mental influence is so strong for these people.
But is it also because, like, these people trying to leave, they've been inside, so I would imagine many of them have seen fellow Scientologists when they tried or did leave, and the pressure that was put on them vis-a-vis things like, you know, being watched on their street, private investigators who are armed up, and what, like, are they worried about that more than like, oh, these guys are going to shoot me right here?
Right. They don't, Scientology doesn't kill people outright. They ruin
Allegedly.
lives. They ruin lives.
Yeah.
And, I mean, L. Ron Hubbard Jr. once said of his dad that my dad isn't going to kill you. What he wants is to see you out of a job, out of your house, in a gutter, crying somewhere. That's
like you need him.
That's what he wants. He wants to see you in that pitiful state. And that was, he said that in the 70s, and that's still what the program Scientology follows today. They like to destroy people. Yeah, they don't just shoot people.
God, that's like there are the sick people in this world who don't get off on feeling good. They get off on inflicting pain. And that's exactly, to a T, who L. Ron Hubbard obviously was.
Well, especially David Miscavige. I mean, that's the people who know him know that he really, the first thing he wants to know when he gets up in the morning is, okay, who blew? Who's gone today? And now we got to go get them. That's the first thing he wanted to know every morning, is who's left. Yeah.
What a sick guy.
Yeah.
What's the story with the Headleys? We've mentioned them a couple times.
I mean, they're wonderful people. They both got in very young. They both grew up in it. They ended up at Int Base.
At where?
Gold Base, Int Base. This base I've been talking about.
Oh, right, where the hole is.
Where the hole is.
Yeah.
They were there, and they met. They got married very young. But in the Sea Org, you're not supposed to have kids. And no, you cannot have children.
They don't want them reproducing little baby Scientologists?
No, I know. They recruit the new ones from the publics, they're called, the people that are not working for the church. But the people who are working in the Sea Org cannot have children.
That's strange.
And they both had interesting positions. They were both in positions of real authority. And eventually they too saw the abuses, and they wanted out. And they have a wonderful story about how Mark was the first to leave, and he knew he couldn't tell her about it because they're so good at interrogating people. And he knew that the best thing he could do for her is that she was just going to have to escape on her own. I mean, it's an incredible love story. That's because so sad, she then had to escape and hope that he still wanted to be with her. And so he escaped first, then she escaped. They each had, ways of getting out that were.
How did he escape?
He grabbed a motorcycle, I think, and just drove and got pulled over. She had to use the ploy of needing to go to a dentist or a doctor, and then ran away when she was at the appointment. I mean, they each had to come up with these different ways of getting out. Mark has written a wonderful book called Blown for Good, and I remember I got to write about it when I was at the Village Voice, but it's a great, and he's such a good storyteller. Wonderful book about their escape. And they're still doing incredible things today. They were on Leah's show, and they do amazing work today. They've got this thing called the Aftermath Foundation, where they help people leave Scientology.
So like the Underground Railroad or something?
Sort of like the Underground Railroad,
Wow.
exactly. Yeah.
So people can like I'm just guessing how this goes. People can like reach out to them anonymously and say, I want to leave. What do we do? And they like say, here's where you're going to get shelter and shit like that.
No, that's exactly how it works.
Wow.
Yeah. And they have helped people, and people come forward, and because it's all confidential, but some people have come forward and says, I want people to know that the Aftermath Foundation helped me. And yeah, they do great work there, and it's not easy.
It's so, you think about these things, and it's not just Scientology. It's one example of it, obviously, but crime often has such a psychological component to it that it happens right in front of our faces when we walk on the street, and the people who are in the middle of it can't just walk up and say, hey, this is a crime. Can you please help me? There's this thing. We hear about it with trafficking things all the time. You'll see that, kids will get on a commercial jet with the person trafficking them, and they don't tell anyone about it because they've been so psychologically damaged. Like, what some of the people, you've obviously mentioned some throughout the day today and told some stories, but some of the ex-Scientologists who maybe are sources for you now, or that you've had to talk with, like, how long does it take? Like were they aware of that once they decided to leave, or like it started to fill in for them later how psychologically
the mental
damaged?
Conditioning is so deep and so damaging. It's incredibly difficult to leave. First of all, it's very difficult for them to understand what's happening to them and to understand they're being victimized. Once they finally start to realize that, then it's incredibly difficult just to get out. They know that Scientology will retaliate by having their family members cut off from them and friends, and they'll lose their job. But then even if they're able to get through all of that and get out, the mental thing is still there. I mean, people have told me that it will take 10 or 12 years before they finally can get rid of that Scientology way of thinking about other people.
10, 12 years.
Yeah. It's so hard. That's why somebody like Chris Shelton is kind of amazing, because most of these people will just go away for years, and then they start to come back, and they're curious about how things are going, and then eventually they become activists. Chris Shelton left Scientology, and like a month later, he's on YouTube talking about it. I've always been amazed at how well.
Who's he?
He's a YouTuber. He's a really good YouTuber about talking about Scientology. He was a Sea Org member. He and I do a little thing every week where we go over the Scientology news together. Great guy. And I was just always amazed at how quickly he went from a Sea Org member to somebody exposing Scientology. But most people have to go through a much longer period.
Why do you think his was so fast?
I don't know. I give him a lot of credit that he was able to do that. He's been out now. He's been speaking out now for 10 years. And I'm still amazed that, like, for example, now another new person who's come out recently is named Alex Barnes Ross. He's in England, and he's really waking people up to Scientology's problems in England.
Hey guys, if you have a second, please be sure to share this episode around on social media and with your friends, whether it's Reddit, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, doesn't matter. It's all a huge help. It gets new eyeballs on the show, and it allows us to grow and survive. So thank you to all of you who have already been doing that, and thank you to all of you who are going to do so now.
But he had to go away for like 10 years before he could start talking about it.
Do you have any, I want to bookmark England for 1 second. I just want to make sure I ask this. When some of these people come out, obviously you've been reporting on this for 29 years, so you're an enemy of the church, I would imagine. Have you had guys give you intel on things Scientology may be plotting against you to make your life uncomfortable?
Yeah, no, they try to make things tough on me, and they've run various operations against me. Probably the most elaborate is that I'm married to somebody who has a great job, and they have tried to run multiple operations against her to get her bosses freaked out to get her fired.
Whoa.
And in one of those operations, they actually hired an out-of-work New York Daily News reporter to pretend he was working on her and that she was involved in some scandal or something. And, fortunately, the people my wife works for are very intelligent people, and they could see that it was kind of a scam and they didn't fall for it. But I mean, I've had people close to me, people I care about, tell me that they'd been harassed by a Scientology PI on other continents. I mean, they have spent so much money. They never just call me up and say, we don't like that story. We want a correction, or, here we have a statement. I'd love to put their statements in my stories, Julian.
Do you call them and ask?
I ask for statements. I send them requests for statements.
That's journalistic integrity.
Exactly. Yeah. And they never get back to me. Instead, they go and harass my mom. They've sent a private investigator twice to intimidate my mother in California.
How so, if you don't mind saying?
Well, I mean, knocking on the door and kind of getting her all flustered and trying to ask her questions about me. And it's just disgusting.
And these private investigators, correct me if I'm wrong, usually they're not members of Scientology themselves.
That one is.
He's
kind of notorious. I think he's finally done now. But even he left.
No,
I think what happened was he got exposed. Mike Rinder and I wrote some stories about him, and David Miscavige doesn't like it when a private investigator like that gets so exposed, and I think he stops using him as much.
And so the guy left the church?
I think he's still in the church. I haven't heard much about him in the last couple of years, though, Julian. I'll admit. I don't know exactly what he's up to. But the guy I'm talking about is named Dave Lubow. And for years, he was, first there was a guy named Eugene Ingram. He was notorious. But then Dave Lubow became kind of the chief dirty tricks PI for Scientology. And they used him against me. They used him against a bunch of different people. And that's not him.
How do you spell his name?
David Lubow, Lebow.
Lebow.
Let's see. There's a picture of him.
There's Paul Haggis.
I wrote about him a number of times, but
Is that him?
Yeah, that's him. Yeah.
Oh yeah, like all the Scientology.
He would get in Mike Rinder's face. He got in my mother's face. What a
scumbag.
But then but like I said, we wrote about him a number of different times, and I think Dave Miscavige decided to use other people. But they've run numerous operations against me, and they've tried to,
oh, there he is with Mike.
Yep, there we go. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, Mike was really really used to him, but. No, they've tried a lot of different things against me, and the things they do, most of what they do is just online smearing. They mischaracterize the things I've done in the past and just smear me all day and night on Twitter and stuff. It's just, I just ignore it.
Do you ever sleep with one eye open, a little afraid?
No, I mean, the best thing to do, they want you to be afraid. The whole point of what Dave Lubow is doing, what Eugene Ingram was doing, with some other people they've got now, they want you to be afraid. They want you to fear like, oh, they're what are they going to do to my family? And then they want you to be so afraid you stop. But if you just think, they're not really, there's only so much they can do. But believe me, the reason why they do it is it works. There are many people that are not talking today because they've gotten that intimidation from Scientology and they've decided it's not worth it and they stop talking. No question. But I won't shut up, so too stupid to stop, I guess.
Well, I'm glad you're not, because it does take brave reporting. I said the same thing to Mark Bunker, to be able to get these stories and maybe if there's ways to reach them, because they live among us, also continue to reach people who are inside the church and come across this stuff and, I don't know, get woken up from it. But, I mean, the scope of Scientology, despite maybe the lack of numbers, is always so shocking to me. Obviously, they have the home base in Clearwater. You mentioned they're doing more and more in Florida now, but they've been all over and at least continue to be in some ways in California. But they're also global. Like we keep mentioning England, and this is not something I got into with Mark at all in episode 203. But like, what's Scientology set up in? Is it in London, or like what's the story over there?
When L. Ron Hubbard started things, he wrote Dianetics when he was living in New Jersey, actually.
All right, can we run that back? Like, I like this state, okay? Yeah, I did know. He wrote in like Edison or something.
He was in Elizabeth.
God, that's dangerously close.
Yeah. and or I don't know where the house was exactly. It's anyway.
Let's not find out.
The first foundation was in Elizabeth, and but L.A. became a very important central. L.A. became basically the world headquarters for a long time. But yeah, he spread it. But then, see, that was in the early 50s, 54, 55. But then what happened was, and then he created a church in D.C. called the Founding Church, but it really wasn't the first. But it was an important one in D.C. as well. But what the problem he ran into in those early years was he was making a lot of health claims. If you did Dianetics, you did Scientology, it would heal anything, including cancer. That got him in trouble with the government. And so I mean, I like to say, back then, if you made those kind of claims, you got in trouble with the FDA. Today, if you make those claims, they give you a TV series. But
it's very true. I know it's true.
But back then,
I lived it.
It got you in trouble, and so he that's why he went to England in 1959. Was that he was uncomfortable with how the American government was, getting up in his business. So he went to England in 1959. He bought this estate in Sussex called St. Hill. And he had gotten it from some Maharaja of India that had owned it or something. I don't know the exact name. I never know this stuff off the top of my head. I always have to look it up.
St. Hill.
But it's an estate called St. Hill in Sussex. And that became the English headquarters for Scientology. Now, there are facilities in London. There's what they call an ideal org in London. But to this day, the most important location probably in all of Europe is in St. Hill in Sussex. There also is a European headquarters in Copenhagen. And those are probably the two most important locations in Europe. But to this day...
Where's that on a map, Alessi, if you don't mind? This isn't London.
I think it's southeast of London. If you get a map out of it's East Grinstead, and back out, you'll see.
Let's zoom out where we are.
Yeah,
all the way.
South of London, not southeast. South of London, right?
Hour and a half south.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. And to this day, very important site for them. I was telling you before the show started, Scientology has 4 big days on its calendar. New Year's Eve, they have a big party. March 13th is the birthday of L. Ron Hubbard. They do something on their cruise ship in the summer. And then in the fall, they have a big event at this UK headquarters in East Grinstead, England.
This podcast was born on L. Ron Hubbard's birthday.
Wow, really?
God damn it. All right, so 4 big days, we got it.
And then, but the pandemic put all that, everything got stopped for a couple of years. And so just this last fall, David Miscavige decided to finally restore those events to their original locations. And he began with this England, the St. Hill event. It's called IAS, for the International Association of Scientologists, which is the Scientology membership organization. And it's really their slush fund. It's their defense fund. You pay a lot of money in Scientology for services. That auditing we talked about with finding the invisible body Thetans. But they also just want you to give straight donations. Just give money so that Dave can do things like build ideal orgs, fight lawsuits, that kind of thing. That's called the IAS. And so they have their big annual gathering at St. Hill. This year, it's usually in October. This year, they held it the first weekend in November. And up to that point, there have been some, the tabs had all decided based on some flimsy evidence that Tom Cruise had left Scientology. That was all the talk last summer.
The tabloids?
Yeah. All the press, the tabloid press, were all claiming that based on some very flimsy evidence that Tom Cruise had left Scientology. So I think Scientology was sensitive to that. So at this November 3rd gathering in England, the return of the IIS to St. Hill, the return of David Miscavige to St. Hill, Tom Cruise flew in on his helicopter, made a big showing. And then the second night, which is called the Patrons Ball, when they celebrate the big donors, not only was Tom there in black tie, but he was glad-handing all the folks that were at the party. They were all shaking his hand, taking selfies with him, and then they posted the selfies to social media which normally Scientology's not cool with. I think Scientology allowed it this time because they wanted to counter those tabloid rumors. And so, it was a big thing for them. They had returned their event to its home in England. Tom Cruise had shown up, and then pictures of Tom Cruise with the Scientologists were out on social media. Very clear statement. Tom Cruise is still as dedicated as ever. And I really think that is the case. Then in December, late December, they filmed their New Year's Eve party that they then let everybody see on New Year's Eve at the Shrine Auditorium in Los Angeles. They had a big showing there. And then in March, they were returning their birthday event to its original venue, the Ruth Eckerd Hall in Clearwater, Florida. They put out a press release about it. I'm always curious to see which celebrities are showing up because they've lost some, Julian. They've lost Kirstie Alley. They lost Kelly Preston.
Died. Yeah.
Kelly Preston, Kirstie Alley, Chick Corea, all three died of cancer. Laura Prepon announced in People magazine that she had left. Beck Hansen told an Australian newspaper that he had left. Danny Masterson's in prison. And, Leah Remini left. Lisa Marie Presley had left, and then she had died. They just don't have some of the big names they used to have. So which younger celebrities are stepping up for David Miscavige?
Well, the big ones are Cruise and Travolta, right?
Right. The big ones are Cruise and Travolta, and Cruise definitely showed up to that St. Hill celebration.
Right.
So I was curious to see who's showing up at the L. Ron Hubbard birthday. And I got into their press release, and it turns out they themselves posted some really interesting pictures showing that in the front row of the March 16th L. Ron Hubbard birthday event at Ruth Eckerd Hall, in the very center of the front row, standing and giving David Miscavige, were John Travolta and Elizabeth Moss.
No.
A very pregnant Elizabeth Moss giving a standing ovation to David Miscavige.
Why do they always get the good ones? She's so good.
And the reason this is so significant, and it's interesting because none of a lot of reporters follow.
There she is.
A lot of reporters follow my Substack, and none of them said anything about this. I thought that was really odd. But the reason why this is important is that we've never seen her at one of these events before. Her dad had died in January, and we know that he had kind of been in David Miscavige's doghouse for a long time.
Her dad was in it.
When I asked Mike Rinder what he thought about this picture, about Elizabeth Moss being in the front row with John Travolta, he said it really reminded him what they did with Tom Cruise 20 years ago, when Tom Cruise was just sort of on the edges and they brought him in and really got him gung-ho to the point where he was willing to go on TV and talk about Scientology with Matt Lauer and all that stuff.
You're being glib, Matt.
Yes.
So glib.
Mike Rinder really believes that they may be doing that with Elizabeth Moss, and John Travolta's there sort of as the older guiding hand helping her out. I mean, this took some effort. She's very pregnant, standing in the front
she's
row.
About to pop.
Yeah. So, really kind of an amazing moment. And I think maybe they are getting her more involved and getting her more visible. Now, they didn't put this out in a way that the public could easily see it. I don't know that they really wanted us to know that she was there, but I found it. And
how'd you find it?
Let's just say I took a very close look at their press release.
Okay.
And
we'll talk about that one off air.
And then I also looked, and then once I found that for this year's L. Ron Hubbard event, I decided to go back a couple years and see who else had showed up. And it turns out that last year's 2023 L. Ron Hubbard birthday event, I found a photo showing that Michael Pena,
damn it,
had been at that event. And I have never...
Another one.
I knew Michael Pena was a Scientologist, but I had never seen Michael Pena show up to one of these events before. I think that's significant. Again,
Kiki, what are you doing?
I think these younger Scientologist celebrities are being expected to step up a little bit now that some of the older ones are gone.
Oh, if he starts getting like so many leading man roles now too, we're gonna know it's Scientology. God damn it. So that's what they rely on. They rely on being able to market 4 or 5 huge names to say, look at us, we're normal.
Right.
Because even important famous people not only want to be a part of this, but are like excited and are towards the top of it. So if you join, you could be like them.
Right. And they have been told, they have been conditioned. Say, what they can say. Oh, get a book. It helped my life. It'll help your life. And you can go back, and it's always very programmatic. They always say the same thing. Yeah, it really helped my life. You should get a book and read it.
Yeah, that's what Grant Cardone said.
And I talked to Jason Begay about this. Jason was one of the few celebrities, other than Leon Remini, who left and spoke out. And he said, "Yeah, we're trained that way. We can't. You can. What you think we're going to say to a reporter? Oh yeah, it's great to remove your invisible body Thetans at only $700 an hour. It's a gas,
Oh my God. So, but we got off it for a second. Elizabeth Moss's father, you mentioned, was in the doghouse.
Elizabeth Moss's father, Ron Moss, was a musician and a manager, and he managed Chick Corea. And the way that Mike Rinder and Claire and Mark Headley explained this to me was that back around the year 2000, 2001, Chick Corea suddenly found himself in a serious financial problem. And that could be potentially very embarrassing for Scientology because he's OT8. An OT8 Scientologist should not be having financial problems. And so, first of all, they bailed him out. David Miscavige bought the Mad Hatter studio from Chick, which got him money and helped him out. But they all, as Mike explained, they needed somebody to blame. So they blamed his manager, Ron Moss. And so for the next 20 years, Ron was kind of on the outs. He couldn't talk. When Chick Corea died a couple of years ago, Ron Moss went on a music podcast and said, I didn't speak to him the last 20 years. And he admitted it. He said that. He hadn't spoken to him. It's because Scientology wouldn't allow him to. He had basically gotten demoted, but they couldn't really kick him out or retaliate against him because his daughter was doing so well, right? So now that he has died, he died in January.
Was she in it, like from childhood?
Yes, she's always been in it. She's defended it to the press. But I think now that her dad has died and he was kind of on the outs with Miscavige, just 2 months later, after Ron Moss died, Elizabeth Moss is in the front row giving David Miscavige a standing ovation at the L. Ron Hubbard birthday. I think that's very significant. I think it shows he's banking on her to increase her involvement and become perhaps the next great ambassador of Scientology after Tom Cruise.
Now she's been in it. Like
she grew up in it.
Because these other guys, though, well, we'll get to Leah. Like she grew up in it, but
Michael Pena is one of the few who joined as an adult.
Yeah. So why do they have so much trouble? I mean, to me, it should be obvious, but like, why do they have so much trouble recruiting? The new young actor who might have a shot or something like that.
I mean, the word's out that it's weird. The word is out that it's abusive. I think it's tougher for them to recruit. I'm amazed that they got Michael Pena, aren't you? I mean, in 2001, people knew that Scientology was problematic, but apparently he was interested. He has said in interviews that he was on the edge of a drinking problem. He wasn't like, major drinking problem, but he was on the edge of a drinking problem and he wanted some way to get control of it. And he believes he found that in Scientology.
The Thetans. There you go.
Yeah. It was the Thetans doing it to him.
So sorry. That's kind of funny. But like Giovanni Ribisi, was that another one who grew up in it?
Absolutely. And, so you'll still see people writing stories. I just saw one in In Touch Weekly, and then a bunch of others have all followed up now that, well, we haven't seen Tom Cruise in L.A. recently. Maybe he's leaving Scientology. What is it? They always want to write that story. And they didn't. How does a reporter like that not at least acknowledge that just 5 months ago, Tom made such a huge showing in England for Scientology, David Miscavige?
It's clicks.
So, it's just, I do what I can to try to show what's actually happening with these celebrities. And right now, Tom Cruise, John Travolta, Elizabeth Moss, Michael Pena, they are solid for David Miscavige.
Do you think that the coverage of Scientology in general is weird? And let me clarify what I mean there. It seems like it's used for the clicks of like the regular gossip page 6 stories, like when someone might leave or not. But it is allowed by the press to operate without much coverage when you have some of these famous people in the middle of it. You have the cult angle. You have the dead cult leader angle. You have the 4'10" guy running this and telling everyone to get lost, or 155 centimeter. Let's give them everyone that counts.
4'13",
whatever it is. Like, there is so much here. There's so much juice here, and yet it seems to be just kind of the only thing they report on is like, well, are they leaving or aren't they?
I will say that the press coverage has actually improved. I really do think it's gotten better. There was famously an amazing Time magazine cover story that came out in May 1991, which called Scientology the global cult of greed or something. And Scientology sued for $400 million against Time magazine. Time eventually won that lawsuit, but they spent millions fighting it.
Mm-hmm.
That created a chilling effect throughout the 90s that made it really difficult for people to do stories. People still did stories. I still did stories. Washington Post did great stories, but it definitely produced a chilling effect. Tom Cruise's antics, though, in 2005 really changed things. It started to open things up again. But even then, the coverage was, like you said, it's kind of goofy. It's focused on celebrities. I would say, though, that the last 10 years, the coverage has gotten much better thanks to people like Leah Remini, for example, who's really focusing on the things that matter. Alex Gibney in his movie, which I was very fortunate to be in, Going Clear. I think publications are more interested in the story about the actual abuses that are going on, what people go through that go in and come out. So I would say that the coverage is better, but we still do get these very silly stories about the celebrities, about Xenu and that kind of thing. And I understand why people would write about that kind of stuff. But I do think that the more important subject does get covered.